Welcome to Macro Hive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. We aim to bring you the best macro analysis to help you successfully invest in financial markets. For our latest analysis, visit macrohive.com. Welcome to Macro Hive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. We aim to bring you the best macro to help you successfully invest in financial markets. For our latest analysis, visit macrohive.com. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day price action of markets. So over the past week, we published a series of pieces that look at some bigger issues. I wrote a piece on how base effects could lead to deflation in the US next year, just as base effects have led to high inflation this year. We also have an excellent piece by John Tierney, who lays out the clear facts from opinion on climate change. There's some eye-opening observations that he makes in that piece. And then we have a piece by Dominique Dworfrico, who argues that French politics is going against what consensus was expecting ahead of next year's elections. You can access all of these pieces by becoming a member of Macro Hive at macrohive.com. This also gives you access to our archive of research notes and to our member Slack room, where the Macro Hive team and members discuss markets all hours of the day. It's refreshingly different from Twitter. When you sign up, the first month is free, and then it's only the cost of a few weekly cappuccinos. It's well worth it, and many call Macro Hive the hidden gem for investors. Once again, sign up at macrohive.com. And if you're interested in our more high-octane research product for professional and institutional investors, drop me an email on Bilal, B-I-L-A-L, at macrohive.com. Now, on to this episode's guest, Christian Angermeyer. Christian is an entrepreneur and investor and the founder of Hyperion Investor Group, his family office and merchant banking business. Hyperion focuses on financial services, especially fintech and crypto assets, tech, life sciences, media and entertainment, and real estate. But above all, he's someone who thinks different from the mainstream. So I'm sure you'll enjoy our conversation. So welcome, Christian. It's great to have you on the podcast. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you.
Thanks, Bilal. Thanks for having me.
Well, the first thing, before we sort of jump into all the various topics I want to discuss with you, just one thing I wanted to ask about your background, like what is it about you or your history that gives you such an eclectic set of interests in different markets and different areas of the world, different technologies, just a very varied targets and interests that you have?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I would say already, if I go back, and literally there it started, like already in high school, I had the luck. I was pretty good, and I was pretty good in everything. Like it was like, so I was always interested in literally everything. There was not a particular like, oh, Christian is good in languages or math or whatever. I really was happily good, but especially I would say I was very interested, and this is why I was good, in a very broad variety. And that I think was always my thing. Like there is not even an explanation that I do it on purpose. Like, and then for example, I started studying economics, but helped starting a biotech company practically in fourth week of my first semester. And then this was a success. And then practically earlier than I had ever dreamt of, I had financial independency. And the two things I always told myself, I want to just do things which interest me, and excite me, but on a very broad scale. So I'm not working for anybody. I'm investing my own capital. So I always wanted to be broad and sort of satisfy my curiosity. And the other rule was always no business with assholes, because why should I? It's not logic. Like it's that you want to have a happy life, great people around you, interesting people around you, and sort of learn new things all the time. And I think sort of Hyperion, my family office, is sort of structured around that desire, to learn new things. And by the way, that's one of my big things. This is not like, I always believe like things cannot be just copied. It's not that I think this is sort of the way to do things in general, or this is how other people should do it. My view is like it worked for me because what I was always very honest to myself about myself. So I was always, I think, sort of self-awareness, or I don't know, self-searching, or what the English term is, sorry if it's not the proper one, but like sort of really knowing yourself is super important to be happy. So in the first instance, you need to know yourself. And in the second instance, then you need to, and this is also important, I think some people already don't know themselves, that's the worst, but like some people who know themselves, then they don't dare to live accordingly. So, and these are the two things, know yourself and then dare to say, okay, I know what I am and how I am and what makes me happy and how I should structure my business and whatever. Let's do it exactly that way. And what I tell every new employee who comes to a Pyron is like, look, a Pyron is structured around me sort of to fulfill and actually sort of build on my strengths and hopefully balance my weaknesses and sort of, it's centered around my personality. So that's the long answer.
No, that's really good. I mean, on the second point, like know yourself, and the other one is then live accordingly. What I think one thing that holds people back from living accordingly is fear. You know, people think, okay, if I do something where I'm going to live the life the way I want, I should get a mortgage and a house. I should get a salaried job. Yeah, I mean, how do you overcome that fear or that fear of failure? You know, that side of things.
Well, I totally agree, by the way. So fear, I think, is the worst emotion of all. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Dune, which hopefully someone comes into the cinema now, the new movie. But I don't know if you know Dune, the famous novel. Yeah. And then the biggest part of it is sort of fear. And like there is the famous word, fear is the mind killer. Yeah. And you have to overcome it. And I was always lucky. I always accredit it to my parents, by the way, who are very normal, down to earth people, like from the middle class. But I think they gave me that backing that I can be anybody, do anything, be all right. So this was always like, thanks God, like I didn't have that fear. I always believed in myself. So I was always self-confident. It was then later on really heightened or even fortified, at least, with psychedelics. So that what I think is so if anybody is on the podcast who has fears and is admitting it or not secretly or whatever, I would always say, read a good book about psychedelics.
Okay, well, perhaps we can start with psychedelics then as a topic, you know, now that you've mentioned it. I mean, it's one of those things where there's an association of psychedelics with the whole hippie movement from the 70s and, you know, kind of new age side. But then seems to be a lot of kind of mainstreaming of medical benefits of psychedelics. So, I mean, what was your entry point to psychedelics, so to speak? And then where kind of are we in terms of its possible uses?
So three things. The one thing, let's start like the hippie, and I know that's obviously the first always. It's interestingly, it's an outlier because I'm very also interested in the history of psychedelics, and meaning some of them are new, but like sort of the natural, let's say older ones, big five or whatever. Like I mainly like say magic mushrooms, psilocybin. There is a natural version of LSD, which comes from ergot, which is a kind of fungi. DMT in Central America. Anyway, so all these some of these psychedelics have been used partly since thousands of years by humanity, but now comes the point always in a very ritualized, ceremonial, in most parts actually religious way, which was part of society, which was actually at the center of society. It was often actually an elite drug where the priests and the shamans and the leaders of certain things were doing it in order, by the way, the most famous historical cult or religion around psychedelics, or two things that is interesting in that point with fear, is where early the Eleusinian Mysteries, and there was a city in north of Athens, 15 kilometers, called Eleusis, and there was the spiritual center of the Hellenistic world, and was around Demeter, the Demeter cult, but they were ritualizing, in a ritualized way, drinking kind of psilocybin and ergot. We found both in research. So, and everybody reports, the main actually report we have from Plato, who's a famous philosopher. So he reports that he overcame his fear of death in the Eleusinian Mysteries, and that all or most of his philosophical ideas, which by the way the Western world is built on, he had while tripping in the Eleusinian Mysteries.
Interesting. I had no idea about this, to be frank. Yeah.
So overcoming fear was the big, and especially fear of death, was the big theme of the Eleusinian Mysteries. And then, by the way, you should have him on a podcast. Happy to make the intro. And the book is amazing. A friend of mine, Brian Muraresku, he wrote the book, The Immortality Key. Actually, and it's important, proving, not just assuming. So he found proof that the early Christians took over the psychedelic component of the Eleusinian Mysteries. and that early Christianity was a psychedelic cult. Yeah, and that is actually the reason I'm Catholic, and I was always like, okay, how did this work? Why did people not wanted to, but why did people accept to be killed? But how could an obscure Jewish cult, that's what it was, become within 100, 200 years, 300 years, the dominant religion in the Roman Empire? Yeah, and truth is, the Christian overcame the fear of death by tripping, and that gave that religion a very big it was very appealing because, and at the same time, if you don't have fear of death because you have seen the afterlife or then you're like, okay, I can die for my religion because I know what's next. Yeah, so that explains a lot. And my friend Brian, by the way, did not just assume it; he approves that because he found like ceremonial cups again from early Christians with magic mushrooms in it. And we're gonna announce soon. I can't say that in detail because I don't know when the podcast is coming out. But there will be a massive university in the world, and I'm doing something with them and Brian and the Catholic Church, and so for going more into that. So
how interesting! Yeah. So yeah, that'll be. I look forward to sort of seeing that. But from what you say, it does make sense because it is quite. The early history of Christianity, I think there's been a lot of revisionist kind of history with the church later on to kind of give a certain story. And the early sort of 100 years or 200 years, it's, that's a bit of a kind of unknown period.
Which is, by the way, also, I'm very, again, I sort of morphed from Christian upbringing to more like broader spiritual, but I think it's always the pity if you look at any religion, at the beginning, they're all very spiritual. They actually all very good because they normally take any religion. They always normally tell you, be a nice person, don't be an asshole, treat other people like you want to be treated. There is these simple life rules. By the way, one other thing which is very interesting, I always look at, especially because I'm always thinking about ethics in biotech especially, is that all the religions have a component that the humans were made in God's image, or even often God takes something from him and makes humans out of it, which is for me the legitimization, if you want to see it like that we are actually allowed to create because we are God-like. So, and then every single time, if you look at the history of religions, when religions become an organization, then two things normally happen. You have to kill the spiritual people. So always you have a cleansing of the mystical people, because you don't want, what you have with psychedelics, what the early Christians wanted was a direct connection to God. Yeah. If you want to build an organization, the worst thing you can have is millions of people running around and saying, hey, every Sunday I speak directly to God. No, somewhere the Pope said, no, there is just one person, who's speaking to God, and that's me. Yeah. And at the same time, you actually, it's so sad, like you don't want the mystical people, you actually want to bring back fear. So in the early days, every religion is taking away fear, and then the Catholic Church brought it back because you can rule people better with fear, and dominate them. Then the same, you don't want to tell people that you are a small version of God, because again, that doesn't really work together in controlling them. So that whole part that we are made in the image of God is actually late in every religion later on taken away by the dogma, because it doesn't really fit in what they need, which is very sad. So I deeply believe in the origins of religions, that they all have a real spiritual value and core, any one of them, and then they all turn, I don't want to say evil, but almost evil, like in the moment they become an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you tell this story, because when you were sort of talking about the history of psychedelics, I thought you were going to then talk about Aztecs and South America or something, but I had no idea actually the Hellenic culture, or the ancient Greece, was so influenced by this, which again is also quite an eye-opener for me, at least.
Yeah, no, they were literally like, you can go through most cultures, and wherever psychedelics are indigenous, and they are, by the way, in one form or the other, indigenous almost everywhere. So the psychedelic mushrooms are around the world. And yes, people always think of South America, which is true, but you have them in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, the Sekhmet cult. You have them, which was one of their big festivals, which, by the way, it's also one of the other funny anecdotes. Sekhmet was this warrior goddess, but also goddess of healing. And it shows also how people, by the way, that research is not always neutral, because so we know, if you read sort of the inscripts and the hieroglyphs, so there was a festival once a year, in her honor for 3 days. And for 100 years of Egyptology, everybody wrote it was a beer festival. Yeah, I come from Bavaria. I never drank alcohol, but I did Oktoberfest once. It was very horrible because if you don't drink alcohol, Oktoberfest is the worst you want to do. Yeah, but the interesting thing is when I was reading that already early about the Sechmet festival, this is not what it is. What is describing like people dancing for 3 days and coloring themselves, having sex. Actually, like it's like that's not Oktoberfest. That's Burning Man. That's really Burning Man. It's an ancient description of Burning Man. And now finally the people are coming out and like, maybe they didn't take beer. It was actually a psychedelic cult, who were tripping 3 days in a row. So, but like for 100 years, people were not afraid to, so they wrote what they wanted it to be, not what it was, which shows like there is a lot of history to be uncovered, I think, in generally, because sort of the research of history, and I'm a super history geek, is always biased by the people who make it and what they want to read into it. Yeah,
there's an agenda often. And so if we then think about psychedelic sort of research today, where are we? Or where did kind of not quite the mainstreaming, but where did it kind of come from? Yeah.
What I want to say, so I think the 70s were almost an outlier because Timothy Leary was trying it to show it as the anti-society, and but the most important thing is that most of these psychedelics have very strong potential to cure various mental health. And I really use the word cure because they have the potential to fully cure most to all mental health issues. Yeah, the big ones are depression, anxiety, which is kind of fear, anxiety. Then addiction is huge, especially in the US. Yeah, so the psychedelics are not just not addictive, but they cure addiction of other substances. And then post-traumatic stress disorder, any form of body dysmorphia from obesity to anorexia, meaning literally name me any problem of the mind, psychedelics can most likely help. Yeah, so and very medically. So what we want to do, what is one of my biggest, meaning it's the biggest passion of my life and in my portfolio, is we're bringing back these psychedelics, actually, by the way, plus some other non-psychedelic drugs. We really see that as a mental health play, but our sort of core portfolio of psychedelics into it's super important medical realm, as treatment against mental health issues. And when I say medically, it's not just that these will be medically approved drugs, but these will be drugs which just can be taken together with a therapist. So this is a group of drug, which is already existing with other stuff where you can't take it home, but like you have to go to a therapist and he's doing literally tripping with you. He's your trip guide, and then you can go home. But that's part of that's the healing process. But it has the super strong potential. I have to say that way because we are out and about to prove it once and for all. Yeah, and I'm very, very optimistic that we will succeed on a broad range of substances to show that and to get them approved as medical drugs. But they have really this curative potential, which is the biggest problem of our time. Like if you look at healthcare market or a healthcare problem, like more than 1 billion people suffer from a mental health issue, and that is actually way too low because the people who suffer and not coming out at the moment because it's still a stigmatized disease is very, very high.
No, I understand. So I have a couple of sort of questions. I mean, one is, why was it that there was big advances or use of SSRIs and all of those types of antidepressants? And why wouldn't psychedelics looked at earlier on? How come other types of medications were kind of explored first?
So technically psychedelics or some psychedelics were explored first because this is what also is one of the reasons which gives me this enormous confidence that we're going to succeed with Atai on a big front in a big way, is because some of our substances actually had been medically available with a therapist. So the way we wanted to be available again in the 50s and 60s. So these were approved drugs. And what had happened, which is actually a very sad story, sometimes in life, and so there's not one evil person. Like sometimes in life, some negative things come together, and sometimes in life, some positive things come together. In this case, we had like in the 60s and then early 70s, what came together was the following: A, mental health, that's super important to know, was not recognized. So people had it, by the way, and unfortunately we're not on video because I got an amazing book from 1600 from an investor to our IPO of Atai, which is the oldest book, it's the original ever written on, and they called it melancholia, depression. So, but it was not diagnosed, and the same, we didn't know about PTSD, meaning people were odd after the war. Anyway, so mental health was not a big thing. Yeah. So you had these approved drugs. And then what happened is that practically the hippies took it outside the hospital, yeah, which was technically illegal, but nobody cared, by the way, yeah, till the hippies went against the Vietnam War and became very political. And then, which is, by the way, what I'm saying is like, is proven by documents. So then, unfortunately, especially America, the White House was like, how can we discredit these people? And then somebody had the bad, smart idea to say, hey, look at them. We need to say they're crazy, because you must be crazy if you're against the Vietnam War. Oh, they're taking cannabis and LSD. Let's say that makes you crazy, because that's a good storyline, yeah. And because mental health had no advocacy back then, it just slided into nobody stood up for it, yeah, because it was not needed that much, yeah. And then it got forgotten. And then the SSRI came in the 80s, and I don't want to say they super bad, yeah, but what I can say is they don't heal. So SSRIs are permanent medication. So I always think healing is better than numbing. And then I give you my favorite example where I say, like, I have seen 20 close friends who really suffered. I had the luck, I didn't answer the question. I can make it short because I told it on many other podcasts, and I think these topics are way more cooler what we're discussing. But my short version was I came to psychedelics sort of almost unwillingly, because I had no intention, I had no need. I was always a very happy person, but there was a sequence of things from a scientist telling me how safe and amazing they are, two very close friends having it in holiday, and someone had said, okay, let's do it, because I know scientifically, as somebody who is in biotech, they're super safe, nothing can happen. Tried it, most important thing of my whole life, although I was already happy. So it added an enormous amount even to my thing. And then I was like, oh my God, I can totally see how these drugs, if they add this much of positivity to me, what they can do to a person with mental health issues, if they add that much to a healthy person.
Yeah. And, just in terms of the business, in kind of the pharmaceutical business, the business model, I'm not a specialist, it seems to be get a drug, make sure that people need to take it for the rest of their life, and then scale. And that's the way it works.
So that is always the evil view on pharma, which is sort of, I don't even think it's true. Some drugs just don't have the potential. I think it's not, so coming back to SSRIs, it's not that somebody is sitting there in anything, by the way, not just mental health. There is an evil chemist and who says, let me design the molecule in a way that this is not curative. No, some substances are curative and some are numbing, or some are curative. So, and I don't think there is anybody. So I tell everybody, because this is always sort of a question of a little bit like, not conspiracy theories, but like, oh my God, like Christian might not want magic mushroom thing. I do want so badly that they become medically available because they're curative. And I know, well, you know what? We have 1 billion people who suffer from mental health. I think it's rather 2, yeah, because we have this sort of unofficial number. And if I can cure a good portion of them, we're gonna be a $50 billion company. Like, so you can make a lot of money with curative solutions. I'm definitely not worried about it. But like SSRI, so what I wanted to say, like I had 20 friends who really needed it, yeah, who I observed over the last years getting help with magic mushroom or with mushrooms and other stuff. So DMT, ibogaine. So it's a little bit dependent on what is your issue. Like some psychedelic is better than the other one. And what was the amazing thing, and I have to say disclaimer because we're a listed company, that's obviously not a study like this is, but 20 people is not one. Yeah, obviously friends are emotionally even more impressive or more moving for me because I was close to them. But like what I can say, sort of my small Christian experience where I saw 20 friends seeking help with psychedelics, all 20 of them were helped. Yeah, some were completely cured, some at least massively relieved. Yeah, but what is most important is all 20 of them, and one name I can say because he went on and actually started a psychedelic, one of our companies, Compass, which is a subsidiary of Atai, yeah, with me, Lars Wilder. He was a colleague who had treatment-resistant depression, was a mess, yeah. And then he took mushrooms, and then from one day to the other, he was cured. Yeah. But so he extremely, because he started with the other 2 founders, George and Katya, and me as seed investor Compass together. But every one of these 20 people in his or her own way became an ambassador. Yeah. That, by the way, when people ask me, how do you think mushrooms will be like sort of one, or in any psychedelics when they are approved, how will they be distributed? I'm not worried at all, because it's one of the very few things in life I have seen which literally goes viral, because everybody who was helped with it, and even the ones who were not helped but had an amazing improvement or bump in its life, like me, you want to talk about it. Yeah, I've never ever in my whole life met one person who said, holy shit, last week I got SSRIs, I love it, you have to take it. Never happened, because it's a shit drug. Yeah, so it might keep you at bay, and I don't want to talk it down, because it's better than nothing. Yeah.
And in terms of the distribution, I mean, you did say that ideally it has to be taken with a therapist. I mean, are there enough, or has to be taken? Yeah, so it has to be taken with a therapist. I mean, where can you get these therapists? Are these like psychiatrists who sort of expand their training to include this, or?
Exactly. Yeah, we will tap into the market. This can be doctors, like GPs, like this can be psychiatrists, psychotherapists. They will require, this is actually, I have to say, it's defined as we speak, because sort of the most advanced psychedelic is psilocybin, so the component magic mushrooms. Yeah, and sort of our subsidiary company, Compass, which is doing the magic mushrooms, they are about to discuss this with the FDA, whatever, with it, building up training centers. But there will be an additional training, but it's not going to be a dramatically long one, because they are practically physically super low to no risk. Yeah, so there is nothing you need to learn. It's not an operation or whatever. Honestly, my very short form is like a trip guide, let's call it that colloquially, needs to be a good human being, needs to be a compassionate human being. And this is what a psychotherapist, by the way, is. Like, it's sort of, it is. So I love it, Michael Pollan. And by the way, because I think there are so many things I would always like to talk about mushrooms, and we have our psychedelics, and we have other things we want to talk about. But like Michael, there's one book which is called How to Change Your Mind. Yeah. From Michael Pollan. And so everybody who's interested in it should read it. And Michael Pollan says, like, a psychedelic therapy is like 10,000 hours of therapy condensed into 4. Yeah, and that's what it is. It's actually sort of a therapy on steroids, like a super intense one, but it is a therapy. Yeah, and if you're a good therapist, you're able to handle it.
No, it all sounds super, super exciting. And we could carry on talking about this, but, I do want to talk about some other things as well. And yeah, related area that you also focus on is longevity. So, obviously you have a big focus on well-being and improving people's life, which is great. The longevity side, I suppose one thing is there's lots of skeptics in this area where people think, how can you really, extend people's life? So maybe we can start with that in terms of how this skepticism that people have.
Yeah. And first of all, because it's a financial related podcast, I always say, with my 2 sub themes in my biotech portfolio, which is mental health and longevity, yeah, I have a total addressable market of 100% of the world population, because that's what we all want. We want to be happy, we want to be healthy. Once we're happy and healthy, we want to live forever. So in terms of TAM, like 100% of world population. So, and I know, like, I think first of all, we're not doing woo-woo. It's not a wellness company in longevity. Like, we're doing real science and we have more than 15 programs to understand. First of all, we're starting to understand aging, what's actually happening. Yeah, and I'm very, very convinced that once we understand something, this is how it always has been in humanity. When we start 2 things, we need to name something as a problem. So this is why I'm so adamant to say aging is a disease. It's not normal. We believe it's normal because it's happening since such a long time to all of us that we ingrained it in religion and mythology and everything. So, but it is a disease. That's the first thing. And once we name it as a disease, and then we start understanding it. And once we understand it, we're gonna find solutions for it. That's what humans do always for any problem. I'm very optimistic in that. It won't happen overnight. There is no magic pill. So most likely, and we do understand, by the way, aging in the meantime really well. And the simplified way, which was coined actually of a colleague of mine who works with me, Professor Manuel Serrano, he wrote a book and he called it The 9 Hallmarks of Aging. So practically it's sort of accepted now, or it's the way to look at it. There are 9 areas in our body, from mitochondrial dysfunction to others that which is going wrong. And so it's not going to be one wonder pill. So we need to work on these 9 hallmarks, and most likely you need multiple drugs. Yeah. but it's going to be thousands of them. So I think my personal, but it's just a very, very early expectation is that we need like 50 to 100 at the end drugs, medical compounds to really slow down and reverse aging. But it's going to happen, and it's not going to happen overnight because it's not magic pill. It's like it's going to happen gradually. But I do believe that in the next 10, 20 years, we are able to push healthy, that's super important, healthy life expectancy. Yeah, maybe 10, 15 years, which by the way, as an average number would be a huge success. And I think it's going to happen. And then it's all about, I mean, again, if your podcast listeners are financial guys, it's all about optionality. Like I'm 43, let's say for the sake of easiness, and let's use 40. I anyway at the moment have a life expectancy of 40, 45 years. Yeah, it's a lot, by the way. If we think, like I always try, again, it's not on we don't have a camera now, but like, yeah, I would like to look at your iPhone. It didn't exist 15 years ago. And think of the first iPhone, and think of, iPhone is always for me a good way to really visibly show exponential growth of technology, that our today's iPhone can do more than the computer who did the Apollo moon mission. This is insane if you think about it. So give it now 45 more years, yeah, so much will happen in science. And so I'm very confident at least we're going to push life expectancy another 15 years. And then I have 15 years more of optionality. And somewhere there will be the point where we pushing life expectancy quicker than I'm aging. Yeah. And this point will come during my lifetime. I just need to survive till then and not have a stupid accident or whatsoever.
Yeah, I was going to just ask, the types of things you're looking at, or the types of things being searched here, are type medical processes or compounds or medicines that slow down or reverse activities in our body that make us age. Is that kind of broadly what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I give you one example. I give one example we're working on. Like we have a portfolio company of mine called Rejuveron. They're working on telomere shortening. Yeah. So it is actually known, there's a great book about it, that sort of the shortening of the telomeres is responsible for aging. Yeah. And there are actually, by the way, now comes a tricky point. Yeah. At the moment, aging is not defined as a disease, neither is dying. So even if I could show that something is stopping you aging, if I would go to the FDA, they wouldn't approve the trial. And if they would, by the way, it would be very complicated to find so-called endpoints, because like you would like, okay, shall I check in 50 years and see if Bilal is still alive? Like what's my... So no, and it sounds right, but it's a big discussion we and other companies have with the FDA. Which biomarkers can we use to prove that somebody's aging slower or reversing whatever? But this is, so my strategy in my aging portfolio companies, and I have two big ones. The one is called Rejuveron in Europe, Switzerland, and the other one is called Cambrian in the US, is to find drugs which have an imminent, accepted, let's call it that way, disease to cure. Yeah, so that I can run trials, that I can get it approved, and especially that I can make money quickly. Yeah, and then who have as a second sort of use case, let's call it an off-label use case, the ability to slow down aging. So for example, there are some very rare diseases where children, the telomeres are very quickly shortening. And these are children who look like 80 when they are 20. So they're rapidly aging. So this is, everybody is accepting that to be a disease. Yeah. So meaning if I go to the FDA and say, hey, we can change that, this is actually that's a very easy drug approval, yeah, because it's a rare disease. Like, and then once you have a drug which shows, okay, we can stop shortening these telomeres with these children, it would be natural that we say, why don't we take it when we're grown up? Like, because shortening of the telomeres is good or stopping shortening of the telomeres is good for all of us.
And in terms of these sorts of drugs, I mean, you mentioned during our lifetimes, we're going to see some major breakthroughs. Do you think we'll see some major breakthroughs in the next, say, 5 years, say, or is this more like it's quite hazy? It could be 10 years, 20 years, or is there something kind of coming up?
So both. So the question is a little bit, what does C mean? That's also one of the other things is distorting a little bit the view on people, because people are disappointed because they see the exponential growth in the iPhone and in consumer technology. They're like, why is it not happening in health? Why have we not cured cancer? Yeah, although we want to cure cancer. And I'm the optimist. I'm like, okay, the thing is, you have a 10-year, and by the way, the iPhone is around 10 years old. You have a 10-year delay because of the approval. So when you say, why don't I see stuff, then you mean, why is there not stuff on the market yet? So everything which is coming to market now was more or less super simplified, researched or invented around 2010. So think about now how actually which kind of exponential AI in drug development is a very new thing. Yeah, it's some years old. Yeah, not 10 years old. So practically, I would say the cut or the landmark was, from my point of view, around 2015. So I like to draw that, like, there's an incubator called Y Combinator, and they actually in 2008 made a big famous blog post, which I think it was 2008, 2007, around about that time. Yeah, and they called the tech boom right. They were like, actually, yes, there was the boom before, but they were like, the next 10, 20, 15 years, like from 2008 on, gonna be the golden age of tech, because all the auxiliary services to starting a tech company back then in 2008 were collapsing. Server farms, yeah. So which meant the founders could retain more in their company. So the golden age of founders actually started. And B, seed rounds were going smaller because you needed to take less risk, or you needed to invest less money to achieve the same, so to de-risk it, and so on. So this exactly happened to biotech just around 2015. So hindsight, we will say, in around 2015, the golden age of biotech has started. Yeah. Why? Because all the auxiliary services of what you need for a biotech, which 10 years ago you would need millions and millions at the beginning as seed funding, are collapsing now. I don't want to say the wrong numbers, but I think a genetic mouse, which you often need, was, I don't know, I think it was $1,000. My colleague told me now it's $10 or something. I mean, it's literally minus nine, like in computing. Like, again, AI in drug discovery is there since 2015, 16, roundabout. Like, so the golden age of biotech has just started, and now because of the approval process, you don't see that. So sort of things are invented now, and then they need 10 years. So even if we already found something in 2016, this will come to market round about 2026. Yeah. So, and why I'm so optimistic is because I'm seeing it already. We have very, very cool stuff in phase 1, in phase 2. So this will come to market hopefully somewhere in 5 to 10 years, yeah, and change the world.
Okay, that sounds really quite promising, I have to say, listening to that. And then what makes me, then I put my macro hat on and then think, one of the biggest macro challenges at the moment is healthcare costs, aging populations, US, has a particularly dysfunctional health sort of system. I mean, do you think the types of things you're seeing will have a major impact on this?
Yeah, but in a good way. The interesting thing is, my favorite, there are already drugs in mice, for example, which prolong their life 40, 50%. Yeah. And what they also do, what is sort of underreported, is that we have actually a very bad form to age. So we have maybe our primes in the 30s at best. Yeah. Or let's say, let's be a little bit more generous. Like, I think till 50, the human body is kind of fine, and then it starts declining. And the problem our healthcare system has is that we pushed life expectancy to 85. So a huge number of people is for practically 35 years in decline. And that is very costly. You need a hip replacement, you need this, you need that. Interestingly, in a lot of sort of longevity things we see, the way of aging ends. So these mice are not declining gradually, yeah, which they do, by the way, the same like humans, but they actually stay healthy, young, till they like almost 1.5 the life expectancy they should be, and then they suddenly die. Yeah, and it's amazing. That's what we want. Yeah, we want to be like 100, we want to be fine and then die. Or hopefully never die, but like, you know what I mean? Like, so that is, these things will not just let us live longer, they will actually also change the way we age in a very good way, and will decrease healthcare costs from my point of view.
So from a policy perspective, actually, it's funny, recently we had Sajid Javid on our podcast. This was before he became health secretary. But I'm kind of thinking from a policy perspective, what would I advise him? It almost sounds like they should just allocate a serious amount of capital to all of this type of longevity research, because that's the real...
Definitely. Meaning two things, by the way. So for two things. A, because again, it's going to be not just pushing life expectancy, but again, as I said, yeah, indeed making it cheaper, because we sort of are more healthy. Yeah. But there's a second thing I always like to use is like take for a second COVID-19. Yeah. And there is a very famous, nobody wants to talk about it, but there is a very famous number in healthcare, which is called QALY. Yeah, quality of life adjusted years. That's the price governments are willing to pay for one healthy year of their citizens. And interestingly, before the pandemic, this value was very vaguely more or less the same in the Western world, $80,000, $150,000, but it was fluctuating around $100,000 per healthy year. Not more, by the way. There was a very famous thing in Germany right before COVID where there was a drug, where there's a very deadly disease for children. And if these children don't get these injection till day 2, they're gonna die very early. Yeah, but the injection costs 2 million. Yeah. And the German government was not willing, and there are like, I can't remember, 50 children, a super small number of children. And the German healthcare system was not willing to pay this injection for every single child because they were like 2 million for a fulfilled life is too much. So, and then suddenly COVID came and we had all, I can't call it differently, the bullshit where everybody says a human life can't be valued. No, we're doing that all time, every single day. Another example is heart attacks. Yeah, if we would build a fully equipped medical clinic, heart clinic, in every single gas station in UK, for example, we would dramatically decrease the number of people who die of a heart attack, which, by the way, are more people, way more people than die of COVID. Yeah, but we're not doing that because every rational person would say, this is insane, but it's not undoable. You can do it. It just costs a lot of money. And you can calculate how many people I'm saving, and what does it cost? We do that all the time. But for COVID, because of fear, we're coming back to our beginning of our discussion, we completely neglected that there is ever a price for human life. Yeah. So now the question is, and that's the point I want to make, will that go back to normal somewhere? Yeah. So, and my theory is not. I think it will go down. By the way, I made really on the back of an envelope mask. If you take all the idiotic things government have done, around COVID, you are around about a 2 million per saved year. Yeah. So 20x of what they were willing to pay 1.5 years ago. Yeah. So, but now comes my point. I think it's not going to go down to 100,000. That's one of the other reasons why I think we're going to live in this golden age of biotech. I think the voters indeed indirectly, by the approval of these measures. So I think partly they approved the measures. There were 3 things. Partly because the people don't understand that all of them, the voters, are paying the price. That's the problem of economy. Most of the people don't understand it. But it's just half of the truth, or a third. Second, it was fear and panic. Yeah. But third, I do think we live in a world where people value health more than they valued 30 years ago. 30 years ago, maybe they valued freedom more. Yeah. Now they value health more. So I had various discussions with head of states and health ministers who said, I realized I'm winning elections if I'm providing health to my people. And what could be a better storyline than somebody saying in politics, guys, you know what? I'm not just providing a single solution to COVID. I'm going to make you all live longer. That's my jizz. Yeah. I think it's a great political thing.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And while we're, talking about macro and big picture, over the past year, we've also seen other quite remarkable interventions, central banks expanding their balance sheets, printing money and all of those sorts of things. I know you also, on top of all the things we've talked about, you also look at, crypto, you keep markets and macro and so on. How do you interpret these things, what we've seen over the past year? Because it's been really quite dramatic,
Well, so there are several ways to look at it, which are, meaning I don't repeat what everybody says, but so my view is, first of all, coming back to fear and maybe one more thing, pain. I think we live in a world, or we are a generation of people who cannot stand pain in any form. By the way, it's changed. Think about it. There was the famous, because we talked about the hippie generation, Woodstock happened in the year of a very deadly flu. I don't want to make the number up, but it was a multiple of people who died that year than of COVID and everything. It was a huge number. Yeah, nobody cared. because it was a different time. People were able to stand pain. We are not able to stand pain. So I think a lot of decisions and actions can be explained by that pain thing. And for example, I think money printing for that reason alone will go on, because any single problem which could create pain for any stakeholder, it's a little bit like the government's a heroin addict or the whole population. It's not just the politicians. It's unfair to put it on the politicians. They deliver what the people want. And the whole world is addicted to painkillers. Yeah. And unfortunately, if you look at opioids, it's a very, very bad addiction. You're not going to come off that. That's one explanation I always use. Yeah. But there is one other, which is my sort of positive one, because I'm a huge fan of money printing, not just because it makes asset holders richer. That's a side effect. It's a nice one for us. But but the main thing is that I see the world. No, but like investors, I think, have a tendency to reduce their models to economic need or economic numbers. And the world, fortunately or unfortunately, is not a balance sheet. We had times where the economy was practically meaningless, and having the biggest army in the world, Alexander the Great wouldn't have talked about his economy. He would have talked about his army all the time. Yeah. So it's not that the economy is by God given or by whatever given, the most important thing. So we've made it the most important thing. So I think we are back in a time where the competition and the race between states is practically back on being the number one issue of our time. Yeah, and what I want to say is that in the last 50 years, let's make the sort of younger history, we had an economic, but let's not just economic, we had it in science, we had in any form, we had a linear growth. And in a time of linear growth, you can catch up if you fall back. So Germany in 2000 was the sick man of Europe. Now we're on top of the game. America had its Sputnik shock, and then they came back in the game. So when the world is growing in any form, economically, scientifically, linearly, you can catch up with if you have fallen back. So, but now that era has ended. We are now in an era of exponential growth. And my theory, and by the way, this is not my theory. I got that told, and I was like, okay, wow, this is super fascinating, by one of the highest ranking members of the Communist Party in China. So his opinion was like, we are in this world of exponential growth. And like we have seen, and it was interesting coming from a Chinese person, like we have seen the world, Google, who you can't kick off the throne, like there are Facebook, Apple, there are these platform companies, which because of exponential growth and because of platform economic business model, like once they number one, they stay number one. And the same from my point of view is happening with governments, with countries. If certain countries in the world, and ultimately it's all about China, US, and then a little bit apart Europe and Russia, if one of them dominates space, if one of them creates the perfect AI, if one of them creates the first quantum computer, so if one of them makes huge leaps forward in biotech, there are certain things, the first one will dominate the world, let's say, for a very, very long time. Yeah. So if I were a government, I would subordinate everything to how can I make sure innovation is happening in my country. So, and now let's look what's happening because of that money printing, which was not originally intended for that, but I think they're looking at that now and saying, oh, wow, actually, and that's what makes me very happy. Okay, you can say it's my job to be a venture capitalist, but fact is, at the moment, things can be financed, daring, cool moonshot things, which were not able to be financed, like in 2012. So, and yes, all the financial journalists, all the naysayers, they focus on the negative stuff. And yes, we have crazy stuff. We have a GME, a stock, whatever. We have that, but that's the fringe. What they're ignoring is that there are so many amazing but real things financed, which couldn't be financed in a world where money would be tighter. And that is ensuring, because a lot of that is, by the way, happening in the US positively. And I want the US to win, because I think the Western model, meaning it's very simplified, is the one I want to live in. Like I want the West to be the dominant power. And meaning that Europe sucks in terms of foreign policy. It's the US we need to rely on. And so this the real innovation for good stuff is happening. So, And now comes the point, who pays the bill? Yeah, it's actually the people who own cash. Who are the people who own cash? It's by tendency older people in the middle class who maybe are too old to be saved by my longevity technology, so they're dying somewhere anyway. I know it's a cynical view, but practically what this whole money printing does, it's taking money from non-productive people who wouldn't use it anyway. It's taking it literally away because it's an indirect way of taking it away and giving it to younger people. Yes, it's also giving it partly to billionaires. That's the side effect, but it's mainly younger. It's people like the Robin Hood traders and letting them finance innovation. And actually, because I do not believe in governments at all, like in generally, at least I believe in that they can set the framework, but not in details. If I want to make it very, very pointy, I would say I rather trust a 16-year-old Robin Hood trader with capital allocation for innovation than the government. So it's actually the right thing to do. Let's in an extreme way, let's send on checks to Robin Hood traders and let them decide which innovation to finance. And yes, they're gonna create bubbles. They're gonna be some crazy shit, but they're gonna be a lot of amazing companies financed, and it is worth it on a geopolitical level.
Well, that sounds really quite compelling. One thing, you mentioned the US and China, but what can Europe do to be part of this race as well? Because we always hear it's the US versus China, and Europe is always kind of behind and is worried more about regulation than innovation. I mean, what would you say about Europe?
That's a complicated thing. Like I would say, on the one side, I'm always very critical because Europe has no real history or talent or whatever for entrepreneurship, not on the scale America and actually China has as well. On the good side, I believe because the last 10, 20 years have been the decade of social media and e-commerce. That was what the last years more or less simplified were all about. And this was so much the thing of the US and partly China. Meaning I very much believe in the DNA of a country. And if you look like many countries have characteristics of the people. Germans are different than Americans, yeah, and Americans are extremely good in everything which is related to sales and like commerce and whatever. So it's very natural. So even if the Europeans had tried harder, had a better environment, ultimately social media and e-commerce was the American age, yeah, and thing. Going forward, because I very much believe in these real technological innovation, I call it like deep tech and biotech, like space tech, AI, whatever, at least we have a level playing field. Like at least this is what Germans are. We car makers, like we engineers, yeah. So we don't have all the ingredients, yeah, and mainly I think we need more entrepreneurship in Europe, but at least we have the science here. We now need to make sure that the scientists we train at amazing universities are then going to America, yeah, but sort of there is a little bit more of an equal game. So I'm together, but like semi-optimistic.
Okay, no, that's good. And how about crypto? You know, a lot of people have talked about, you know, because of printing money, you know, crypto is the big space to be in. I mean, do you have a view?
So I'm very bullish on crypto as a whole sector, and then sort of we would need to go or can go into details because it's not all talk and not all tokens are the same. Let's start with Bitcoin, which is the one I think if so most people look at, yeah. So simplified that Bitcoin is the counter trade to what I just described. For many reasons, I believe the money printing will go on. Yeah. By the way, and at the same time, interest rates, they might go up a bit, and this is all the fear, but they will not go up as much as, I don't want to say prudent economic theory would say, because I don't think it's prudent. I think it's prudent actually to keep them at zero and to print money. But what traditional economic theory says. And so interest rates will not go up as people think for all what I said. And by the way, because countries going to go bankrupt, European countries can't afford interest rates. So, and by the way, let's be just honest, all the central banks, including the Fed, have been already hijacked by politics. Like the era of an independent central bank is long over. Yeah. So because this is going on, again, and I think I just want to emphasize that it's good that it's going on, yeah, but there always is a counter trade, and that is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the safe haven, is the store of value, yeah, which will go up because money printing goes on. That's a super simplified view, yeah. Yes, it has some use cases, but it's not even important. It will, and it's the better, you could say, why not gold? I just think it's the better version of gold. And by the way, the young generation, none of the people I know has gold. All of them have Bitcoin, yeah. And still Bitcoin is like, I think after the crash, or it's not even a crash, by the way, because it went up so much, it's a consolidation. Yeah, but I think it's still like, what is it, 1/20th of the market cap of gold, a little bit less. Yeah, but like it has so much room to go up if it's just becoming gold. Yeah. And again, this is ceteris paribus, I think, yeah, because of money printing should be way more. Yeah. And then at the same time, we have other tokens like Ethereum, EOS, Cardano, whatsoever. These are then more like protocol tokens, and they are like user interfaces, or they are like programming things for, like, imagine like the Microsoft Windows or a Netscape Explorer. It's like interfaces so that you can build sort of applications on the blockchain. And because I think blockchain technology is so sort of massively game changing, I believe that all these protocol tokens, which are the platform that the applications of the futures are built on, are practically a good investment as well. So about two reasons. The one, Bitcoin is the money printing reason, and the protocol tokens are a technology reason.
Yep. No, that kind of makes sense as well. I also see that you also invest your focus on space as well. What's your thinking there?
Well, not by the way that we're gonna become a spacefaring race. I think that's very far out there, because, by the way, even to go to Mars, I know it's a positive sort of emotional goal, but we wouldn't survive it, by the way. This is, by the way, funnily, space is more interlinked with longevity than people think, because in order to go just to Mars, and I'm not talking about really space travel, we need to solve all the problems of aging, because like you're gonna be dead otherwise, because of the radiation and everything, till we're gonna come to Mars. So it's a side note, yeah. But for the short term, and by the way, that's just the people are saying that we want to go to Mars like Elon Musk, because it's obviously, and it's good to catch the imagination of people. But the truth is that all of these people, Bezos, Musk, they have short term, because they're not dumb, by the way, they have short term business plans to make a lot of money, yeah. The most obvious one is the communication channels, the fiber optic cables, on Earth are where we have them in the Western world. They're coming to a capacity limit because the data volume is exploding. Yeah, and then we have big parts of the world like Africa, Asia, whatever, where we don't even have fiber optic cables, and it's way too expensive to renew them in the Western world and to build them new in these areas. So it's way cheaper to have internet connectivity, aka Starlink, for example, above the clouds. Yeah, so it's all practically all these so-called constellations, will become the telcos of tomorrow, which is a very profitable business. Yeah, and I'm investing especially in all the infrastructure plays around it. For example, one of my favorite portfolio companies is a German listed company called Mynaric, and they are the only real commercial available product where they can link any flying object, so any satellite, anything, with laser for data transmission. And laser is the only way for sort of large volume data transmission. So all the satellites out there, all the constellation, they need, for example, laser connectivity, which Mynaric is delivering.
That sounds interesting. This also sounds like another huge game changer for the world as well, if we're able to achieve this. Again, very optimistic as well.
Meaning my view is in the next. I think we have a lot of also issues that would be another podcast like to solve. Yeah, but meaning my positive view is in the next 20, 30 years, or let's say in the next 10, 30 years, the world will change in an unrecognizable pace. Yeah. So again, we haven't even started grasping how drastically different the world will be in 20, 30 years on a, I think, net super positive level. Yeah. The problem is, and that's what's actually sort of what I'm thinking a lot about, I have not really figured out what to do, because at the same time it will actually install or create a lot of fear in a lot of people, because people don't feel at home in this world, because the world is new, so they don't see a place for them in this world. Yeah, and that could create a lot of political unrest. So the last time that happened was like in the last 2 centuries ago, 1850 following, where it was practically the transition from the agriculture era to the industrial era. Yeah, but so many people felt left behind and left out that this era gave us communism and nationalism, because people who feel left out and left behind and who have fear, they always resort to very basic, tribalistic, and unfortunately, most times negative things like communism and nationalism. So, and we need to avoid that this is happening again, which, by the way, I think psychedelics are the solution, because they make you able to feel connected, to find your place in the world, to maybe change yourself, because if the world is changing, we need to change as well. Yeah, but I think I'm very, very, very optimistic that sort of psychedelics could be the key solution to help an entire world population ease into a world which is so unimaginable now that, we need to ease them into it to understand it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, kind of, moving down something a bit more mundane, I noticed that you dabble in movies as well. I mean, I'm a huge movie fan on the consumption side, not on the production side. And I do actually follow the stats of movies a lot, because I'm just a data sort of person. And what strikes me is it's very hard to make money in movies. If I look at box office grosses and the amount of movies that hits and so on, and then you have the whole Marvel franchise juggernaut and so on. I mean, is your interest in movies kind of a commercial interest, or is it more almost like a hobby?
It's sort of in between. So I figured out the way to produce movies, and we did some cool ones. We do like 5 a year, partly German, partly international. Yeah, and so to make money at the margin. But I have to say, like, the movie business is not an easy and not a high yielding business. So you don't go in the movie business as a producer, especially an investor, to make money. Yeah, but you can make it in a way that you make a bit of money. Yeah, and hopefully not lose too much. But it is, for me, I think creativity is very, very important. Again, and there is not even I could argue why creativity is important, but I think certain things you don't need to argue. You should do what you want to do and how you want to express yourself, full stop. Yeah. So I want to be creative. And for me, movies, for example, are one way to be creative. And by the way, I think movies and companies and company building, investing in companies is not so different, because it's all about literally the word creation, creating a movie, creating a company, creating a piece of art. I think there are different ways to be creative, and we sort of are not used to associate being an entrepreneur or being an investor with creative, but creative in the true meaning of the word, to create something. I think we are. So an entrepreneur is an artist, who creates something out of nothing.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I can definitely sort of sympathize with that as well. Now, I always like to ask my guests a few questions to round off our discussion. One is, what's the best investment advice you've ever received?
I don't think there was one, but I think as an entrepreneur, it's entrepreneurial advice, maybe investment advice as well. It's blurry with me because I do both. I build companies and I invest in companies, but it's be daring and be sort of dream big, but also don't rush. Yeah. So and I think that goes, although it's almost like some people say, oh, I need to dream big and then need to sort of hyper grow as quickly as possible. And I think there are times for that. But in general, I think it's sort of, you can dream big and yet steadily grow and go forward. And I would say, if I look at the biggest mistakes I made in investing and sort of my professional life, it was always when I was too greedy or wanted too much in too short period of time. And then in Germany, I don't know if it's an English expression, when you run then too fast, you trip over your own feet. I don't know if it's an English expression, but so this was one of the best advices I ever got. So dream big, but also don't forget you have most likely hundreds of years to achieve a lot.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's actually excellent advice. And I'll also, try to, follow that on a personal level as well. Another question I wanted to ask was, you're obviously very well read, you sort of in lots of different sectors. So how do you manage your informational research overflow? There's so much, information out there. How do you filter things? Do you have a system or not?
No. Meaning I like to read, and I like to read two things. I like to read bits and pieces, like online. I like to read books, but it's actually more for me. I very little read research or whatever. So I'm very happy. I think I have an amazing team at Apeiron, at my family office, and we have 40 people now, and mainly senior investment guys, all with different sort of talents. So, and I always encourage them. I think sounds super very approachable. We have a lot of discussions. What do they see? Because I'm always I had this discussion yesterday with a friend. Because it was a podcast, not a podcast in German. They were oh, you're an original thinker. I don't even like the word, because I don't think I'm that smart. in terms of original, I think I'm very good because I'm extremely interested in people. And I cultivated an image like everybody knows that I like to listen, like about cool stuff, like so my own colleagues, so friends of mine, and must not always be investors, can be like people from totally, meaning scientists, artists actually always have a good view on the future, because they dream it. But I love people to tell me their opinions, and then I form my own one. So it's like an amalgam, what's the English term? Like a condensate, of many, many different opinions. But I get it more what I want to say from people by talking to them and listening to them and looking what they are doing. I also always say like my rule is, which is I think hopefully a good thing to be a human being. Every person I meet knows at least one thing more than I do in something, like has something to offer intellectually. So I'm always trying to find that out. Or I also think like I know very cool investors. I'm very proud to have some friends who are great investors, and then listening to them, looking at them, and trying sort of to then assimilate or do what fits to me again. And then you need to know some things I see and I clearly see why it works for others, but it wouldn't work for me because I'm a different person. Some things I'm like, okay, this would work for me. You know what I mean? Like, so both in character traits and in information, I'm very relying on a constant exchange with cool people.
That sounds excellent. Yeah. And you mentioned, reading. I mean, have there been any books that have really influenced you? And if so, which ones?
The two ones which influenced me the most are Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill and The Law of Attraction from Rhonda something. No, another author, but there are two. It's The Secret, and the better version, I think, or the more deep version is The Law of Attraction. But Secret and Law of Attraction is very much the same from the content. And Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. That's sort of practically my philosophical or spiritual worldview.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. I don't think I've read The Law of Attraction. I've read the Napoleon Hill book, and I'll need to reread it just to refresh my mind. But it's good to get these recommendations. And, before we sort of finally wrap up, what's the best way for people to follow you if they wanted to follow your investments and your, what you're up to?
The two things are Twitter and LinkedIn, I think the best ones. And Twitter is C, like from my initial Christian, C and then _ Angermeyer name. Yeah. And on LinkedIn, you find me with my name, like Christian Angermeyer.
And I'll include the links on the show notes. So with that, just wanted to give you a big thanks for participating in this podcast. I learned a huge amount, and hopefully we'll be able to have you on again as well.
With pleasure. It was amazing.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please subscribe to the podcast show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating and a nice comment. Let other people know about the show. We'd be really grateful. Also, sign up to become a member of MacroHive at macrohive.com. We'll be back soon, so tune in then.